The Phantom of Pripyat, the spy who walked into hell for a microchip. Pripyat, Ukrainian, SSR, 1986. The radiation did not have a smell, but everyone in the zone swore it tasted like metal. It coated the back of the throat, a ghostly penny that wouldn't dissolve. For the 600,000 men and women conscripted as liquidators, this taste was the flavor of heroism and death. They were shoveling graphite, spraying decontamination foam, and burying a city to save the world from the atom. But amidst the sea of lead-lined tunics and gas masks, there was one man whose purpose was not containment. In the dusty archives of the GRU, Soviet military intelligence, declassified only after the fall of the Union, he is referred to only as Asset K. In Western intelligence lore, he is the cesium thief. He did not come to Pripyat to bury the past. He came to steal it. This is the untold story of the most dangerous espionage mission of the Cold War. A mission not defined by gunfights or car chases, but by Miller records and a ticking clock of invisible decay. Part I. The Ultimate Cover. By May 1986, the Exclusion Zone was the most heavily guarded place on Earth, yet paradoxically, the easiest to infiltrate if you had a death wish. The Soviet machine was hungry for bodies. It needed drivers, miners, and shovelers to feed into the radioactive maw of Reactor No. 4. The man we shall call Nikolai A., cover name, found in his forged dosimetry logbooks, arrived on a bus from Kiev with a battalion of reservists. He was ostensibly a chemical troop sergeant, a specialist in decontamination. In reality, sources suggest he was a deep cover operative for the DGSE, French intelligence, or perhaps the CIA. The provenance of his handlers remains a subject of fierce debate. His target was not the reactor. It was an apartment on Lenin Avenue, deep within the evacuated city of Pripyat. During the chaotic evacuation on April 27th, 36 hours after the explosion, a high-ranking KGB technical director named Viktor Bryukhanov, no relation to the plant director, had fled his apartment in a panic. He left behind a half-eaten breakfast, his wedding ring, and, crucially, a prototype surveillance node disguised as a standard shortwave radio. This device, codenamed Glass Ear, was an experimental passive listener capable of intercepting encrypted frequencies from the Duga-1 radar array, the notorious Russian woodpecker. The West had been trying to crack the Duga signal for a decade. Now, the encryption key was sitting on a dusty shelf in a radioactive ghost town. Nikolai's mission was madness. Infiltrate the sealed zone, survive the radiation, retrieve the device, and get out before his DNA unraveled. Part 2. The City of Ghosts. The genius of the operation lay in the chaos. The zone was a hive of frantic activity. Trucks roared, helicopters chopped the air, and officers shouted orders through megaphones. Nikolai integrated himself into a cleanup squad assigned to the residential sectors. Their job was to spray the buildings with burda, a sticky, molasses-like decontaminant designed to glue radioactive dust to the ground. For 3 days, Nikolai played the part. He sprayed walls. He drank warm vodka with terrified conscripts in tent cities. He watched the glowing ruin of the reactor burn in the night sky. He wore his dosimeter, but he had rigged it to underreport his exposure. If the officers knew his true dose, they would have medically evacuated him. He needed to stay. On May 14th, the opportunity arrived. His squad was ordered to sanitize a block of apartments near the Palace of Culture, mere hundreds of meters from Nikolai's target. The silence was the loudest thing, Nikolai would later reportedly tell a debriefer, in a transcript that surfaced in a 2003 auction in London. You expect war to be noisy. But Pripyat was a tomb. Laundry was still hanging on balconies, stiff with radioactive dust. Dolls were left on playgrounds. It was a world paused in mid-breath. Part 3. The Red Zone. At 14 hours, amidst the confusion of a shift change, Nikolai slipped away. He had to cross 400 meters of open ground. In 1986 Pripyat, distance wasn't measured in meters, but in roentgens. The wind was blowing from the reactor, The air around him was sizzling with ionizing radiation. Every step was a roll of the dice with cancer. He reached the apartment building on Lenin Avenue. The elevator, of course, was dead. He had to climb 9 flights of stairs. He was wearing a standard-issue Soviet lead apron and a respirator, heavy, suffocating gear that made every breath a struggle. Sweat pooled in his mask. He breached the door of apartment 92 with a crowbar. The interior was a time capsule of the Soviet 1980 seconds. A calendar on the wall marked April 1986. A child's homework lay on the table, and there, on the bookshelf, sitting innocuously between volumes of Lenin and Pushkin, was the glass ear. It was heavier than it looked. Nikolai wrapped it in lead sheets he had smuggled under his tunic. But as he turned to leave, his personal Geiger counter, a Western model hidden in his boot, began to scream. It wasn't the ambient radiation. It was the dust on the windowsill. The apartment had been left with a window slightly ajar. The fallout from the first night, the most lethal, fuel-flecked particles had drifted in and settled on the carpet. Nikolai realized with a jolt of ice-cold fear. He wasn't just standing in a contaminated zone. He was standing inside a particle trap. He had likely absorbed his lifetime limit in the last 10 minutes. Part 4. The checkpoint. Escaping the building was only half the battle. Getting the glass ear out of the zone was the impossible part. Every vehicle, every person, and every piece of equipment leaving the 30-kilometer zone was subjected to rigorous dosimetric control. If a soldier's boots were too hot, they were confiscated. If a truck was too radioactive, it was buried. Nikolai had a piece of tech that was radiating isotopes like a small sun. If he walked through a checkpoint, the alarms would trigger instantly. He would be arrested, stripped, and the device discovered. Here, the spycraft of the cesium thief turned ingenious. He didn't try to smuggle it out on his person. Instead, he utilized the Soviet bureaucracy against itself. He found a graveyard of abandoned vehicles, cars and trucks from Pripyat that were too radioactive to be used, waiting to be crushed and buried. He located a Lada that was slated to be crushed into a cube of scrap metal and shipped to a disposal site outside the inner perimeter. He hid the glass ear inside the upholstery of the back seat of that doomed car. He marked the vehicle's chassis number in his mind. He then walked out of the zone empty-handed. He passed the dosimetry checks. He was clean or clean enough. 2 weeks later, a contact in the scrap disposal yard, bribed with Western currency and medical supplies, retrieved the device from the crushed cube of metal before it was buried in concrete. Part V. The cost of the prize. The glass ear made its way back to the West. Intelligence historians claim the data retrieved from its hard-coded memory chips allowed NATO to decipher the triangulation protocols of the Duga radar, rendering the billion-ruble Soviet early warning system significantly less threatening. It was a massive intelligence coup, but the spy who retrieved it paid the bill. Nikolai never worked in the field again. There is no official record of his death, but medical files associated with his alias show admission to a private clinic in Switzerland in 1988. The diagnosis was acute myeloid leukemia and aggressive thyroid degradation. He was 34 years old. The tragedy of the Chernobyl liquidators is well-documented men who threw themselves on the grenade of nuclear disaster to save their country. But buried in that narrative is the strange, dark tale of the man who used the disaster as camouflage. While others were fighting to keep the invisible enemy in, he walked into the fire to take something out. In the end, the glass ear sits today in a classified vault, still slightly radioactive, a humming testament to a moment when the Cold War became hot enough to melt the core of the Earth.